Well, hi, everybody. I'm Don Stewart, and welcome to another edition of Breaking News for this Saturday. It's the 29th day of March, 2025, and we have a huge story to share with you. Hamas has accepted the new Egyptian proposal, while Israel passes a counter-proposal for a ceasefire to the mediators. This is breaking news across Israel. Here's the headline. Israel passes counter-proposal for ceasefire to mediators. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu holds a series of meetings following the receipt of Hamas's ceasefire offer, and he passed a counter-offer to the mediators. This is from YNET News, one of the Israeli websites. The Prime Minister's office said on Saturday night, after the Sabbath was over, that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on Friday held a series of consultations pursuant to the proposal that was received from the mediators a few hours ago. Israel conveyed to the mediators a counter-proposal in full coordination with the U.S. The statement follows reports that Hamas has agreed to the new proposal, which would see the release of 5 living hostages in exchange for an extended ceasefire of 50 days and the renewal of negotiations to end the war without removing Hamas leaders from Gaza. They should live so long they'll get that. Israel, however, is insisting that as per U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff's proposal, Hamas releases 10, just less than half of the hostages still known to be alive. Another 35 hostages believed to be deceased are still being held in Gaza, and Hamas appears ready to release some of them. Great efforts are being made to reach an agreement by the end of the Passover. There are currently no agreements, but a senior source says there's a good chance to reach something. All right, here's what Hamas is proposing. Now get this, 5 hostages for a 50-day ceasefire where Hamas can regroup, rearm, murder any citizens of theirs who may have publicly rejected their rule, as well as receive more murdering terrorists who are in Israeli prisons. All the while, the remaining 15 or so living hostages continue to deteriorate for another 2 months. On the other hand, Israel seems willing to do something similar for 10 of the living hostages. It is uncertain whether there would be a prolonged ceasefire from Israel's response. Netanyahu, you recall, will said very clearly, no, we're going to negotiate under fire. The fighting is not going to stop when we negotiate from now on. The fighting is going to continue. Will he back down from that stance? We'll see. Who knows? And so we'll keep an eye on all that. But this is huge that there has been an acceptance by Hamas of this one deal. Of course, Israel's not going to allow them to keep ruling in Gaza and to leave there. That's not a possibility, but at least they mentioned a number of hostages, 5 that they would release, which is, obviously not nearly enough. And many Israelis are complaining it should be all or nothing, but sadly, that's not going to happen. So we'll see what happens. Now, what we also have is another one of these new videos that the Hamas released of Israeli hostages Elkanah Bulbat amidst reports of the hostage deal progress. This is the man who was in one of the two who was in the video the other day. And basically, he appears in the video to be relatively healthy physically, but he shows signs, obviously, of psychological distress. His voice is cracked several times. He directly appeals to the Israeli government, pleading for his release. He talks about suffocating there. Notably, he denied that he was forced to film the video, claiming it was his idea, not intended as psychological warfare. However, several released hostages who have also did videos when they were there have recounted how they were forced to film videos very similar and to read out messages from their captors, all the while admitting it was not Hamas's idea, but their idea, which is just untrue. Now, of course, when people are in captivity, we should never blame them for what they say to get out of the hellish situation they are in. I don't think any of us can imagine what they go through, and we certainly can understand them saying whatever. In fact, many times their family watches these videos, says, that's not my son, or that's not my daughter, that's not how they would talk. But we realize for the cameras, they have to say something like that. It's a terrible dilemma for everyone involved on the Israeli side. We'll just keep praying and see how it all plays out. Now, another headline along this same line, this is from Israel Hayom. U.S. needs to sanction Qatar. They are not our friends. Now, we've been saying this quite a long time, but there's a real nice story from Israel Hayom that lays it out. And basically, here's the whole gist of it. Is if Trump is serious about creating a new order in the Middle East and stamping out anti-Semitism and anti-Americanism at home, he ought to consider treating Qatar just as he treats Iran. Steve Witkoff recently made a great case for why he should be fired as President Donald Trump's special envoy for the Middle East. In a recent interview with political commentator Tucker Carlson, he praised Qatar's leaders and said Hamas can be involved in Gaza's future. Who is Qatar? Well, they're a major sponsor of Islamic terrorist groups, including Hamas. In fact, over the last decade, the small, gas-rich Arab emirate has subsidized Hamas's regime in Gaza to the tunes of hundreds of millions of dollars. So they paid hundreds of millions of bucks to Hamas. The Qatar leadership shares the same Islamist ideology as Hamas and are the offshoots of the Muslim Brotherhood, and they use their vast wealth to promote this ideology all over the world, including the U.S. Indeed, Qatar has spent billions, that's with a B, billions of dollars promoting its Islamist agenda at colleges and universities all over America, to the extent that they are now the largest foreign donor to American universities. Probably would have never guessed that. Who's the largest donor? Qatar. This money has been translated into anti-Semitism and anti-Americanism on university campuses throughout the country, often accompanied by unlawful, violent demonstrations by far-left anti-American mobs out to destroy Israel, the U.S., and Western civilization as we know it. In fact, as the article goes on to say, the administration would be well advised to treat Qatar just like it treats Iran. Thus, the U.S. should cut all ties to the emirate and impose harsh sanctions on them. As long as Qatar continues to promote and fund Islamic terrorism, it cannot be part of the new Middle East that Trump wants to create. It certainly cannot be part of Gaza's future, nor can it be beneficiary to Hamas. Witkoff has asserted that Hamas can be part of Gaza's future politics so long as it disarms. This suggestion, of course, as the article says, is preposterous. Hamas can never be part of Gaza's future in any way, shape, or form. And the illustration they give, when the Allies defeated Nazi Germany in World War II, they ensured that neither the Nazis nor their genocidal ideology would have any role in the country's future. Hamas is very much like the Nazis of the present. Allowing them to play a role in Gaza's future would be as if the Allies allowed the Nazis to play a role in Germany's future after the Second World War. So that's a very wise editorial. We'll see what happens about this, because this is one of these stories that has always been lingering, and for some reason Qatar has been given a place front and center in negotiations, supposedly being an honest broker and all this, and they're anything but that. Now, finally, headline number 4. A couple of things they bring to the forefront, things we've talked about, but it's interesting how they put it together. The U.S. is making it clear Iran is in the crosshairs. It's another story from YNET. As Trump steps up his threats against Iran and the U.S. moves bombers and carriers to the Middle East, Israel weighs which front is the most urgent. In Gaza, the Israeli military advances slowly, capturing territory and targeting Hamas's leaders. Israel is juggling, as we've talked about here, multiple fronts. But the question at the heart of Prime Minister Netanyahu's consultations is which one is the most urgent and most critical. According to senior security officials, alongside the battle against Hamas rocket fire, Turkey's threats in Syria, Hezbollah's growing capabilities in Lebanon, and the Houthi missile attacks, there's another name high on the list, and that's, of course, Iran. Meanwhile, President Donald Trump is escalating threats against the Iranian regime. Alongside the sharp rhetoric, he's announced that any attack from Yemen would be treated as it originated from Iran itself, which is actually true. He promised to maintain pressure on the Houthis, though he hasn't stopped them yet from continuing their rocket fire towards Israel, disrupting daily life. Now, here's what's really interesting in all of this. Meanwhile, the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, continues to operate in what it calls the new normal. It's a steady pace of attacks and friction across multiple fronts. In Syria, Israeli forces targeted a weapon belonging to Assad's army that had fallen into rebel hands, a strike which also sent a message to Turkey, which, of course, as we've talked about, Turkey's trying to gain this foothold in Syria to have a say-so of what goes on as they want to expand their empire. In Lebanon and Gaza, also, senior mid-level figures of Hamas and Hezbollah have been eliminated. Israel's going forward doing that. On the ground in Gaza, however, and here's the interesting thing. The renewed military operation is moving slowly. The strategy remains to pressure the local population into accepting the compromises proposed by the U.S. and Israel, rather than forcing a broader escalation to end the war. Recent anti-Hamas protests in the Strip generated significant interest, though it's too soon to draw sweeping conclusions from them. For now, the article says it doesn't appear, and here's what's again fascinating and kind of head-scratching in one sense, it doesn't appear that Israel is preparing for a large-scale ground offensive in Gaza. There's no immediate plans to deploy multiple divisions. The current operation is merely measured and gradual. Israeli forces continue to gain ground without sustaining casualties. So despite the slow pace, the situation is relatively quiet. However, any promise of a decisive victory will require significantly more troops, which means a large-scale call-up of reserve forces. So here's what we conclude. So far, there's no shock and awe that Israel has promised over and over again to put upon Hamas. The entire situation, of course, is complicated, and there are so many possible outcomes. So therefore, it's really fruitless to speculate what's going to happen in the near term. Now, we do know from Scripture the eventual outcome of humankind's rebellion against the God of the Bible. We know that the Lord Jesus Christ will return, set up his kingdom. There's a number of events that are predicted to take place before that. We know that's coming. But in the meantime, like we emphasize here, nobody should attempt to predict what will occur next, for nobody knows. Only God knows. Therefore, as we indicate always, it's crucial that we stick to what we do know and work from there rather than attempt to claim we know what will happen next. Only the Lord knows that. So we'll be with you tomorrow, God willing, first thing, and let you know what the latest is, if it's been revealed, what Israel's counter proposal is. And Hamas, of course, will reject it. They'll try and work something out. We'll see if anything will work out. And we'll see if Israel is just forced merely to give up trying to negotiate any longer and just do the shock and awe that they've said they're going to do, which sooner or later they're going to have to, one way or another. They want to get rid of Hamas and their military contingent. All right, I'm Don Stewart again. Thanks for watching. We'll be with you again tomorrow as always. Until then, may the Lord richly, richly bless.